Luke 11, just to give you a little bit of the backdrop, it says these words, Jesus pronounced a woe, verse 52, to the lawyers. That's not lawyers in our modern sense, but the experts of the law. Luke 11:52. He says, "For you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter in yourselves, and those who were entering in you hindered." What a tragedy. And when he left there, the scribes and the Pharisees began, Luke 11:53, to be very hostile and to question him closely on many subjects, plotting against him to catch him in something he might say. Now, as we look at Luke 13, and we summed up the chapter with these words, Jesus is charging the nation of Israel, and he gives this lament over them, which he will do later as he enters into Jerusalem for the final time to die. In Luke 13:34, he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not," or you would not have it. "Behold, your house is left to you." I mentioned to you last Sunday that the word desolate is added by the translators, but it's implied. Your house, you could say it this way, is left to you without me. "And I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Now, I cannot tell you for sure if all the Pharisees and experts of the law were hostile to Jesus. But this seemed to be the big picture. The bulk of the religious leaders were hostile to him, but more than that, they were trying to catch him in a trap. And what's interesting about this is even with that backdrop, even with the lament that Jesus gives to them, the how often really comes to the surface. Because in the very next chapter, Luke says these words, "And it came about when he," Jesus, "went into the house of" who? One of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread. They were watching him closely. Now, this reminds me that though Jesus is saying, look, this whole situation of rejecting my invitation to come to me is going to end in desolation, there's still hope. It is still day. Jesus continues to still interact with the religious leaders, though they're hostile to him. And it is clear from the language that he is there and they are watching him closely. If you have an NIV, it means he was being he was being carefully watched. The idea of the Greek language here is that he was being looked at as though they were private investigators or PIs, and they were watching him just to watch him fall, just to watch him stumble in something. Now, isn't it weird? Isn't it a strange thought for any of us to think that someone might be watching us constantly? You know, we know the movie stars are always hounded by the paparazzi, and they can't seem to go anywhere without people snapping photos. And of course, what sells newspapers is if you find somebody compromised, right? You find them with a weird-looking face, or you find them, they look a little overweight, or they don't have their makeup on. That's all the stuff. Well, here the religious leaders were they were investigating Jesus, they were spying. This is kind of a sinister espionage. That's what's behind the language. And they were trying to find something against him. Why in the world would Jesus accept an invitation knowing that? Would you? How awkward would it be to know that there were a group of people spying on you with the intention of undoing you, of causing you harm, of wanting to destroy you? Why does he accept the invitation? And then again, we could ask, why do they extend it? Why do they want him to be there? Well, I think it's obvious from the backdrop. They want to catch him in something that he's been doing, or something that he will do, but he won't do anything wrong because he is without sin. He's perfect. But he will do something wrong in their eyes. They will see him as a lawbreaker because they don't believe that he should be healing people on the Sabbath. And in my count, there will be a total of 7 times when Jesus does this. There will be a person planted or otherwise in the room, and they know Jesus will have compassion on him or her, and Jesus is going to do it again. He's a leading Pharisee. This is his home. in the backdrop of this time, in the customs of the day. He may be a member of the Sanhedrin. And my understanding of the culture is that they would only invite people who were basically peers of them. So they would invite other Pharisees, other experts in the law of Moses. They would invite social peers because this did a couple things for them. It kind of reinforced their position in society. We're the social elite. You know, it's kind of like a gathering where you have to have an invitation and you know only the top brass are going to be there. That's kind of what this would be about. The socially elite would be invited to this, and it would be, their thought behind it would be a reciprocal thing. If I invite you to my dinner, then you need to invite me to your home. It was you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's kind of the games they played in this religious elite culture. Why is Jesus there? He has no place to lay his head. They don't believe, apparently, that he's the Messiah, yet he's come, and we know, as we look at the backdrop, that this is it seems to be a malicious invitation. And there in front of him, as the camera pans now to a man suffering, there in front of Jesus, verse 2, was a certain man suffering from the dropsy. King James says the dropsy. Most of the other versions say dropsy. Now, some of us joke and we say, we have the dropsies. Have you ever said this before? Have you ever had days where you seem to be dropping everything and you feel like you need to be healed of it? I don't know what my problem is. I'm dropping everything. That is not what this is talking about. This is a disease known by dropsy in Bible times, but it's actually edema, I think is the correct term. It's actually not a disease per se in and of itself. It is something that is a consequence of other diseases. Typically, what it is it's the result of congestive heart failure, kidney disease, or other major organ failure. And what it does, dropsy manifests itself in the retention of fluids in the body. I was talking to someone after the first service, and they said they had a relative in the hospital, and that relative's leg was all swelled up with liquid, and it was so bad it was weeping. That's the idea of the dropsy, or dropsy. It manifests itself in the swelling of the abdomen, of the limbs. It can even disfigure a person, and it is often a sign of a terminal illness or a major organ failure. So the word suffering, which I know is in the NAS and NIV, is apropos. This man is suffering. He's diseased. Now in that culture, remember, the prevailing theology was, if you are sick, what did that mean? You sinned against God. And if you had had a major sickness, then you must have done something majorly wrong. Now the Pharisees and the experts of the law were very concerned about their religious purity. So why in the world is this man there with potentially oozing liquid coming from his body? Why would they have him there? He would compromise the purity of the environment, the purity of the meal, the purity of the persons. May it be that they went out to the street knowing that they wanted to set up Jesus and said, hey, is there anybody out there sick and suffering? We want you to come. Maybe people were shocked. And maybe he was the first one to come. We don't know. But the fact that he is there really is uncharacteristic of these kinds of deals. They really would not want someone of his condition in that position or in that house. And Jesus sees the man. He's a certain man. He's right in front of Jesus, and he is suffering. Our world is filled with people that are suffering. And Jesus just can't help it. He has compassion on suffering people. And so look at the next verse. It says, and Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers or the experts in the law and the Pharisees. Do you see a question that they asked? I see no question. I don't see that anybody slipped them a piece of paper. I don't see anything verbalized by the scribes and Pharisees. But they didn't need to say anything because he knew what they were doing. And he answered them. Their nonverbals, if you will. They had set up the whole thing. They were plotting. But God had set up something else because God has a way of taking what people intend for evil and using it for good. And even to drive home a deep spiritual point. And Jesus says to them, as he looks at the room, as he looks at the man suffering, he says to the scribes and the Pharisees, the lawyers and the Pharisees, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? How many times do we need to go over this, boys? Are we going to do this again? Are we going to dance this dance again? Really? But that's really what's going on. I know this time, somehow we'll get him. He won't, I know he's done it every other time, but he certainly won't turn it back on us this time. He certainly won't trap us in our own trap. No. No. You know how ignorant and dumb people can be? Their pride can blind them. They're dealing with the Son of God. They're not going to trap him. He's going to do everything in his timeline. And notice he asked the question, and they, verse 4, kept silent. They couldn't respond. I don't know if their silence was malicious, like, tapping in the foot. Okay, just let's get on with it. Go ahead and heal him, and then we'll deal with the theological part. Or I don't know if they were just kept silent because they couldn't answer. Maybe they thought if we say the wrong thing, we'll be seen as not people that are compassionate. And Jesus took hold of him. Notice this. He took hold of him, middle of verse 4. And he healed him. And he sent him away. What a beautiful picture. Here's a man who is in a terrible position. He's